He screamed so loudly that blood came out of his nose. According to the recollections of Senecion's valet, the sound was like the squeal of a piglet being stabbed in the scrotum. The room where the emperor lay was immediately surrounded by Praetorian guards. 2 doctors fainted at the sight, and a third vomited all over his notes. On the cold marble beneath his legs, bent in pain, was a pool of cloudy liquid streaked with pus. It was not the first night that his body had refused to obey him, but this time it refused to obey him forever. The chronicle of Consul Licinius Aulus, recorded on the 3rd parchment, reports, on the 6th day before the Heliaca, Nero was found lying on his right side, uttering incoherent sounds. His testicles were crushed. Both glands were a bag of blood. He could not speak, only shook and whispered his mother's name. 7 weeks had passed since the first anonymous denunciation had been sent to the Senate demanding that the root of madness be torn from the body of Rome. The emperor was at that time in his villa in Anzio, surrounded by singers, boys, and false philosophers. He no longer got out of bed. He urinated with difficulty, and his urine smelled like rotten cabbage. The veins in his legs swelled so much that the sheets were soaked with blood by morning. Doctors attributed this to liver congestion. They prescribed leeches, placing them at the base of his spine for a quarter of an hour twice a day. They smeared his skin with a thick ointment of cypress resin and crushed cumin 3 times a day. They did not measure his temperature, simply sniffing the sweat, which smelled of rancid oil. The last diaries of Lucius Agrippa, kept in the archives of the Ostia prefecture, state, Nero demanded that a pillow be brought to him every 2 hours. He screamed that a Jewish demon was hiding in the mattress. His toes were black. After drinking wine, he ordered his servants to lick the floor. One boy, named Spore, died of fear. By that time, the guards were already being changed every evening. Supporters of the senatorial party and Agrippina's closest relatives on her mother's side fought for the right to control access to her body. The locks on the doors were changed daily. Only 3 people had keys: the prefect Harpas, the eunuch Milo, and the priest Publius from the temple of Vesta. The latter subsequently disappeared. The wine was tasted in front of a scribe. Every sip was recorded. One of the servants was hanged for smudging the seal on an amphora. His entrails were hung over the entrance to the thermal hall so that the smell of treason would scare away the Jews. Bloodletting was prescribed in small portions 3 times a week from the veins of the left ankle. On the 3rd occasion, the physician Geminus noticed that the blood was thick like sour cheese. In his report, he noted, "The patient is incapable of sexual intercourse. The scrotum is deformed, the right gland is retracted, and pus mixed with blood is coming from the left opening." 2 days later, Geminus was found dead with his mouth gagged and his feet burned. Nero was still trying to rule. He ordered the crucifixion of the wife of one of the senators for allegedly mocking his voice. The woman's body was hung in the atrium. He ordered that the dogs be fed her flesh, and then he screamed all night, she's singing in my ear." No one dared to object. His speech became incoherent. He demanded that he be brought fragments of mirrors. He said that he saw his mother in the reflections. The physician Melon suggested brain fever. At night, they began to give him opium, a pinch at dawn and poppy syrup, 2 spoonfuls at sunset. It helped for a few hours, then the seizures began again. The Augustan household chronicles claim that strange rumors were spreading throughout Rome in those days, that statues were bleeding in the Tiber, that dead soldiers were emerging from the catacombs, that the emperor was already dead, and that a cursed double lay in his chambers. Some temples stopped holding services. The public avoided orators. Everyone waited, but he was still breathing. 3 times that month, the palace guards locked the gates to the ambassadors. The Senate demanded an audience, but only Publius Crispus, an old friend of the family and a supporter of the moderate line, was allowed in. He tried to get the will revised, but Nero burned the scroll twice, accusing Crispus of treason. Finally, Crispus was arrested. 2 days later, he was found with his tongue cut out. Meanwhile, the body continued to decompose. It smelled of vinegar and rotten meat. The scabs on his back burst open. Ulcers appeared on his thighs. Doctors noted that his pulse was weak, his tongue was gray, and his urine was cloudy with flakes. He was given infusions of bearberry, sage, and powdered dried donkey. The compresses were changed every half hour. The pain was so intense that he bit his own elbow to the bone. The doctors tied him to the bed with straps. Felt pads were placed under his buttocks and changed 3 times a day. No one believed he would ever get up again, but every evening he ordered the praetor to be summoned, dictated decrees, and demanded that the executed be brought back to life. The servants whispered that an evil spirit had taken possession of him. The priests argued whether to pray for him or renounce him. By the beginning of the 6th week, white fat began to ooze from his body. His tissues were decomposing. He lost consciousness more often, but he still recognized faces. He looked at them with hatred. It was believed that he could read minds. Therefore, the servants stopped talking at the door. One of them still muttered a prayer. He was dragged out by his hair and fed to Milo's dogs. It was the last execution in the chambers. The smell became unbearable. One of the advisors wrote, "He stinks like a fermenting temple, but we pray for his return." He did not die. He gave orders. He was still Rome. When blood began to flow from his ears, the servants panicked for the first time. Prefect Harpas ordered that all the bedding be changed, the pillows burned, and the floor scrubbed down to the stone. The 2 porters who had carried the emperor's nightclothes were executed during the day. They were accused of carelessness in touching a body preserved by the gods. On the same day, Publius from the Temple of Vesta, who held one of the keys to the chambers, disappeared without a trace. Later, only his teeth were found in a black jug near the eastern wall of the baths. Nero was no longer eating solid food. Swallowing was accompanied by vomiting, in which doctors noted traces of black slime and flakes of mucus. From the report of the physician Cullen, the stomach rejects food, the tongue is like sandpaper, breathing is intermittent. After taking poppy seeds, there is a lull. Then, screams, cries, attempts to crawl. He now lay almost always on his back, his legs twisted, his heels cracked, pus oozing between his toes. The skin on his ankles was peeling off, revealing a brownish-green mess underneath. One of the young servants dropped a basin of chamomile infusion when he saw a piece of skin coming off his thigh. Every morning, his body was washed with water and vinegar. Small leeches were placed under his armpits, on his temples, and in his perineum. They were kept there for a quarter of an hour until they swelled up. The proctologist, Agrilius, tried to cauterize the swollen abscesses with a red-hot iron, 12 points on the right side. After that, he began to shiver, which continued throughout the evening. His temperature was measured by the smell of his sweat. If it smelled like vinegar, it was lower. If it smelled like meat, it was critical. That night, even his pillowcase smelled like meat. The surroundings began to change. The old Greeks and homilets, who had lived at court for their poetic improvisations, disappeared. In their place were silent men in blue tunics, without any distinguishing marks. They were brought in by the prefect Harpas. Later, it became clear that these were the people of the patrician Licinius and the North African faction. They did not bow before the bed, did not smile, did not kiss the hand. They just stared. Sometimes they took notes. 2 days after their arrival, one of the bodyguards died, scalded by boiling water from an overturned kettle. The second was strangled with a rope made from bed linen. Harpas ordered silence. In his report to the Senate, he stated, "An accident caused by nervousness in the humid climate." Nero no longer spoke. He whispered, sometimes with his mouth, sometimes through clenched teeth. Once he called for his mother. Agrippina had been dead for 8 years. When this was explained to him, he screamed so loudly that cracks appeared in the walls. After that, He gave the order to burn one of the statues of Jupiter and replace it with a sculpture of a woman with her belly torn open. They found marble in the port and brought it during the night. The slaves who installed the sculpture were quartered. Nero thought he saw a fox living in the statue's eyes. He demanded that the eyes be carved out of the stone. The servants began to fall ill. According to official records, 5 died of ear and intestinal disease. In reality, it was the curse of the bed. That was what people said in the corridors. The priests refused to enter the chambers. One, Father Balbin, decided to go in, but was carried out unconscious. By this time, the emperor's body had swollen to such an extent that his fingers on his stomach could not be separated. A liquid oozed from below. They said the stench was so bad that the glass in the lamp turned black. Everything that touched the skin was festering. Every night, secret meetings were held in the north wing, behind tapestries. There, Harpas, Milo, the new ambassador of Egypt, and 2 men from Sicily, whose names have not been preserved in any chronicle, met. They discussed the fate of the will. Nero had previously dictated 3 versions. In one, power was transferred to the Temple of Vesta. In another, to the Senate. In the third, to the most worthy eye. That is what he called himself in his last fit of delirium. His last will was replaced that same night. It was replaced by the eunuch Milo, who changed the wax seal. The original text was burned in a fireplace that had not been lit for 2 days. Black smoke escaped through the cracks. The guards no longer checked his food. They said that the emperor could no longer distinguish taste. He gnawed at the fabric with his teeth and swallowed shards of mirror. Doctors tried to pour barley broth into him through a tube, but he choked. 2 days later, his kidneys failed. Urine dripped into a basin, brown in color and smelling like rotten crab. They drained him twice a day, but the basin filled up overnight. The sheets were stained with streaks of mucus. By morning, all the stains had darkened. They were almost black. The ambassadors from Parthia refused to enter the ward. One of them claimed to have been blinded by the stench. The second tore out his tongue so as not to curse Rome. No one believed this, but rumors spread throughout the city that it was punishment from above. Fishmongers began cutting out the eyes of their carcasses so as not to resemble the emperor. The temples were deserted. Even the temple of Juno was closed for 3 days. Servants were now afraid to even touch the bed. Linen was not changed for 3 days. Flies swarmed around people's faces. One of the doctors suggested filling their ears with wax so they would not hear. The emperor yelled all night. He saw a fanged boy sitting at his feet. He struck him with a candlestick. He smashed a stone lamp. He struck his chest and opened an old abscess. Something thick and gray flowed out. They smeared it with a paste of arsenic and incense. Every hour, it was useless. His body no longer obeyed him. He convulsed. His teeth fell out on the right side. His mouth was twisted. Saliva mixed with pus flowed from his mouth. His hair was matted. His eyelids were swollen. His fingers would not straighten. The servants lifted his hand so that he could bless the guests. His hand fell like a dead man's. But he was still alive, and no one dared to say, "He's dying." When his nails began to fall off, everyone around him began to whisper. Dr. Cullen was the first to say it. "He's rotting alive." The order was simple. Never say that again. Milan personally ripped out Cullen's tongue and hung it on the door of the incense cabinet. After that, no one touched the body without gloves made of coarse wool, soaked in vinegar and ground pine needles. All records were now kept in 2 books. One, official, which read, "Feeling stable, in good spirits, voice clear." The second, hidden in a niche behind a torch, next to the chamber pot. There, they wrote the truth. The emperor's hands were swollen up to his elbows. His phalanges had hardened like bone growths. A liquid smelling of vinegar, rotten meat, and pus oozed from under his fingernails. His face was deformed. His left eye was only half closed, and his right eye began to melt. According to the description of the physician Firmus, a cloudy yellowish gel flowed out of the pupil. They washed it with a decoction of plantain and salt, then with water, then with nothing. They simply tied it with black cloth. The flies still landed on it. His clothes were now strips of fabric wrapped around his body, which were changed every 2 days. Each change of clothes was torture. His skin peeled off like boiled meat. The sores in his groin were the size of his palm. His perineum was one solid, festering wound. His testicles had been crushed 2 weeks earlier. They didn't rot, they just disappeared. The area beneath them was soft, purple, and covered with a blurry crust. It squealed when touched. Once, the pain was so intense that he bit off his lower lip. Blood and pus splattered the doctor and 2 servants. One of them later burned his clothes, refused to return, and was stabbed to death with a guard's sword. Garpa stopped letting even loyal senators in. The official version was that the emperor is preparing for an important announcement. In reality, his body no longer allowed him to be seen. It smelled like a damp crypt, and his voice became slurred. He could whisper, but not words, only intentions, sometimes just names. Those who heard their name disappeared. Some fell to their knees, some left silently and never returned. One of the priests said, "A pig with a golden snout has taken up residence in him." His bones were later found in a cesspool. Every night, the emperor was given compresses made of thyme, elecampane, and ash. They were changed every half hour. The bandages were black with pus. His breathing was wheezy and whistling. The doctors put their ears to his chest. At first, they heard a rattle. Then it sounded like a toad was writhing. Then there was only gurgling. He was no longer urinating. His stomach swelled up. One of the doctors said, "There's darkness inside him." They suffocated him with a pillow in front of Milo's eyes. "There are too many poets in this palace," commented the eunuch. At night, unfamiliar figures wandered through the rooms. Voices could be heard in the darkness, arguing about inheritance, lists, and positions. Someone was examining the rings on the fingers of the dying man. Milo ordered them to be removed and hidden, but 3 of them disappeared. One bore Agrippina's seal. Then the will disappeared. The forgery that Harpas had kept under his pillow. The servants whispered, "Now he will live forever, because there are no more words to kill him." The emperor asked for confessions several times. The priests refused. One bent down, entered the chambers, and suffocated from the stench. He said, "I cannot forgive your sin. You are not flesh." Nero spat in his face, a clot of pus and blood. 2 days later, this priest went mad and, according to rumors, gouged out his own eyes with his teeth. His body was found in the temple of Apollo, covered with inscriptions written in charcoal. "He is still watching." Even Nero's closest associates had distanced themselves from him. Rumors spread that he was already dead, and that his body had been replaced with a wax doll. One of the night guards said he saw the deceased looking at himself. He was burned for blasphemy. Milo ordered the guards to be replaced, and incense to be burned. The scents did not mask the stench. They caused even more vomiting. The list of those allowed to remain grew shorter. Those left were Harpas, Milon, 2 silent women who were simply called sisters. They were later taken to Africa, and a mute doctor. He wrote, "Left leg and right arm paralyzed, pupil rotting, voice hoarse, rash turning into ulcers, pulse unstable, temperature, sweat smells of dirt and honey." These were his last observations. In the 4th week of this phase, maggots burrowed into his body. They were found in the crease between his shoulder blades, under the bandages. There, where there was a bed sore, they were cut out with a knife, washed, and cauterized with resin. The emperor moaned, screamed, bit, and spat. He could no longer walk. He couldn't crawl. He just lay there and decomposed. On the last day of the 3rd month, he tried to raise his hand. He moved. Everyone froze. The servant, thinking that the emperor was dying, fell to his knees and asked for forgiveness for the ruined pelvis. The emperor moved his finger. The servant was hanged, then burned, then trampled into the ashes. Nero's body now lived on its own. He did not eat. He did not speak. He did not command. But he breathed. He was alive. He was power. Rome rotted along with him. He hadn't made a sound in 9 days. His body did not move, did not swallow, did not urinate. Only his chest rose and fell with a heavy, sobbing wheeze, as if someone were breathing with difficulty under a stone. The servants stopped believing he was alive, but he was breathing, and so no one dared to call him dead. His toenails fell off. The toe on his left foot turned black. Then the whole foot turned black. They wrapped it in fir branches to muffle the smell, but it seeped through everything. The sheets were brownish gray and stuck to his body. They were not changed every day. One of the doctors wrote, "The moisture comes from the stone itself." A continuous stream of cloudy saliva, mixed with blood, flowed from her mouth. Her teeth crumbled. A white, pus-filled mass slowly oozed from her ear, in which larvae were later found. His eyes were sunken. The left one began to be covered with a cloudy film, and the right one remained an empty socket after the doctors removed what they called a dead drop of pus. The doctor was immediately hanged. His nameplate read, "Decomposition must not be named." Only one room remained accessible. All other rooms were locked. Harpus had the keys. Secret entrances were sealed. Every day, the guard on duty reported on silence, smell, signs of movement. They sign in silence. Official reports state, "His health is a state secret." The Temple of Vesta demands confirmation of life. They do not receive it. The changes were not only physical. The power around him was crumbling. The Senate no longer believed him. Egyptian ambassadors began consultations with Licinius's people. They were joined by the Parthians. Unrest broke out in the south. Throughout the empire, people said, "Rome is rotting because the king is not dead." Milo kept a separate list of guests. He no longer allowed anyone from the old nobility to enter. Only the mute, the blind, or those who could not write were allowed into his bedroom. Rumors spread. They said that he was an idol, a living dead man, a bearer of a curse. His breath was called the prayer of a corpse. Meanwhile, in the chambers, they were still changing his bandages. Compresses of mint, oak bark, and ash were applied to his stomach. He could no longer control his bowels. His stomach was swollen and hard, his skin covered with a gray-brown film. Between the folds of skin were maggots. They tried salting him, then smearing him with honey, then burning him. Nothing worked. Garpus conducted secret negotiations with the Praetorians. One of them, named Aulus Terentius, stole a copy of the last will and testament. It differed from the forgery. The original read, "If my flesh is not cleansed of pain, let everything return to the hands of the gods." This text was burned. Terentius disappeared. He was found decapitated. His head was placed in a vat of vinegar and set in a niche near the bedroom as a reminder. This is not the time for truth. The emperor was still breathing, but he no longer felt any pain. His body did not react to vinegar, hot iron, or sound. One of the servants struck him on the cheek. The skin caved in. His muscles no longer held their shape. Black cracks appeared under his eyes. Worms crawled in his groin. They were burned with sulfur, but the next day they reappeared. They tried to comb his hair. It fell out. What remained was a tangled mess with white growths. One servant described it as a bird's nest made of corpses. His head was constantly tilted to one side, saliva dripping onto his shoulder. It had rotted away. Under the fabric was nothing but emptiness. At a council meeting, Milo's advisors decided he is no longer a man, but he still has power. The guards were reinforced, the walls were curtained, the lights in the chambers burned around the clock. The guards were changed every 6 hours. Only 2 people were added to the list of those allowed to enter, a eunuch and a blind woman. The rest stared silently at the rotting body, afraid to breathe too close. They stopped talking to him. The doctors no longer took his pulse or listened to his breathing. They just stood there and waited. But he was still breathing. He wasn't dead. He lay there and rotted. The body was no longer breathing. It was moving. Not from life, but from something deeper. From the pus under the skin. From the blisters under the film of dead flesh. From the decay that was pushing out the flesh. His chest no longer rose and fell rhythmically. It convulsed spasmodically, as if a beast were sitting inside, trying to get out. Officially, no one had declared him dead. No one knew what to call it. On the morning of the 14th day of the last month, Milon and Arpas convened a night council. They entered the chambers accompanied by 3 deaf mutes and an executioner. The emperor lay on his back with his mouth open, his tongue stuck out, shriveled, dark green, pressed against his cheek by pus. One eye was missing, the other was glassy. The skin beneath it moved. When one of the mutes approached to wipe his forehead, a sound escaped from his mouth. Not a cry, not a groan, but a rattle like bones crackling in a fire. Garpus ordered all the clothes to be burned. He ordered the entrance to be sealed. The body was to be placed in a lead sarcophagus. But to do that, one thing had to be done. The death had to be acknowledged. Milon refused. He declared, "Until the flesh stops, he is the emperor." But the flesh did not obey. The corpse began to make sounds, screams, sobs, gurgling. The smell became unbearable. Even oil and resin were powerless. One of the guards went blind, the other died of suffocation. The priests refused to approach. Local old women whispered, "Demons live in him. His body is no longer his." When they placed him in the coffin, he stirred. Convulsions, like those of a fresh corpse, the servants rushed away. Only the executioner remained. He took an iron rod and broke his chest. Everything fell silent. Only then did they acknowledge his death. Later chronicles state, the emperor died at the 5th hour of the night. His death was recognized as an act of divine purification. But in reality, his death was only recognized after his body began to decay, right in his chambers. Fluid spread across the stone, and the floor was covered with lead. Servants wrapped the corpse in cloth, but it fell apart. Fingers fell off. One fell into a bowl of incense. It was never found. The coffin was sealed. It was covered with resin. It smelled of burnt flesh. The prefecture wanted to remove the body before dawn, but dogs howled in the streets, and rats crawled out of the sewers. People said, "He's still here." When they carried out the sarcophagus, 3 soldiers died on the first day. One went mad and threw himself into the river. Another went blind. The third cried out, "He's whispering through the iron." The burial took place in complete silence. There were no banners, no retinue, no priests, only oil torches, covered faces, and an armed escort. The sarcophagus was buried at night. By morning, a mound had grown over the burial site. It was surrounded by stones. There was no name on the gravestone. The next morning, an uprising broke out in Rome. Licinius declared that the old dead man no longer ruled. The Egyptians declared their independence. Parthia broke the treaty. The Senate met for the first time in 3 months. Milo was hanged. Harpas was poisoned. All traces of Nero's presence in the documents were burned. But in the basements of the old palace, some still swore that they heard something knocking on the marble at night, as if he were breathing, through the lead, through the stone. He was dead, but they weren't sure it was the end.